guys, Professor Ozpin here with my co-host Fates.
Howdy.
And this is going to be the singles bracket group A video of the first 8 matches. So, starting out for the first match. On the biome of Mountain and Lava, we have Cyan Tulip from Team Cinnabar versus Morgan Helson from Team Alchemy. Now, starting with Cyan and his weapons are called the Keepers. They are a set of brass knuckles with lightning dust that unfold into a guitar blades, and he also have boots with fire dust shots in the heels extending punching daggers in the toes. So they're kind of like Merc's boots, but instead of wind dust, you have fire instead. And then, in this case, comes his semblance, which is, very strong in a 1-1, seeing how this is going to go. His semblance is called Mark of Vengeance, which allows him to place a holographic mark identical to his own upon 7 opponents at a time, while the target receives all damage done to Cyan, and it reverts back, splitting it evenly. So in a 1-on-1, you can see that this semblance is going to do a lot of damage if the opponent hits Cyan. But you can't count out Morgan yet. With her weapons, which is called Blight, 10 daggers with gravity dust properties, and her semblance called Foresight, which means she can react to things faster. And exactly how fast is she can react to it 0.5 seconds faster. So it could actually be a pretty more interesting fight. But now, looking at their fighting styles, I am going to have to give this one to Cyan and his fighting style, because his fighting style is he's more direct, aggressive, and he deploys olive. Most likely is akin to Taekwondo, which is, in my case, is like a very good onward attack set point. But we don't know Morgan's fighting style. But I could say that, against his and hers, this could be an interesting match. Now, going over to Morgan, we already talked about her weapon Blight, which is a collection of 10 daggers. And she does have a matching set of gold rings to control them with the gravity dust. She can then use these in tandem to push and pull the blades around the battlefield, giving her more versatile movement with her attacks. And then, as foretold, her semblance is Foresight, which allows her reaction time to have an increase to dodge things for 5 seconds, and where, she's faster than the stimulus can see. This also requires that there's a stimulus to react, meaning that if their senses can't detect, their semblance provides no benefit. Fate, would you like to read off the next fight?
And thank you, Oz. Now we're going on to the next battle, which is Immaculate Rust from Team Cinnabar versus Cassidy Dunkelgrun from Team Moonshadow. They are going to be fighting on the Urban and Ruins of Beacon biomes. First off, our first combatant in this fight is going to be Immaculate, who has the weapons Toil and Trouble, which are both transforming, range, and melee weapons. Toil is an assault rifle with a pointed axe blade on the bottom of the barrel, with dust cartridges for different effects, and Trouble is a sidearm heavy revolver that has a dagger bayonet, and the two of them can be combined together into a bardiche, with the rifle barrel in the front, a pistol barrel, and the spike opposite of the axe blade. The semblance of Immacula is Rival Claim, can depower dust in close proximity, weakening or disabling firearms, vehicles, androids, or so on, so sort of like an EMP, but it drains a lot of aura. Her fighting style is very defensive over offensive, and is very sort of like turtling, trying to be on the defensive, but also just trying to possibly win from range. That's what I'd assume from reading the weapons and such. Now I'm going to be looking at Cassidy. Cassidy's semblance, which I'm going to be going first over the weapon, is called Spawn of Evil, where she can produce a black mist that works very similarly to creating the familiar that Rigora from Team Silver uses, which creates a sort of familiar, or it acts kind of like a summon. The two forms that this familiar can possess when under Cassidy's control is a Beowulf and a King Taijitu. It gets weaker over time, though, since this is an aura construct, unlike the Shini summons, and that means that it drains aura consistently like a battery, and it gets weaker over time until the aura breaks and it likely disappears. There's also the possible added weakness of, since it doesn't mention the durability of these familiars, Beowulfs are usually really easy to defeat, but King Taijitu are a lot riskier. However, as a result, I'd assume that the Beowulf takes less aura to maintain, but the King Taijitu would take a lot, like possibly 30 to 40% just to keep around for a little while. Now, I'm going to be going over the weapon, Kenning. Kenning is a sword that has a net gun that it can transform into. It has 3 circle components on the blade, which glow red for fire, blue for ice, and white for wind, that dust can be used to power. And I assume that with the different dust in their control, the net would have different elemental abilities, judging from which one is currently being used on it. Cosby's fighting style is more of a close-range fighter. However, Cosby also likes to keep at range to summon their familiar. I'd say that personally, I would say that I feel that this fight could more possibly go into Cosby's favor, mainly because of the King Taijitu, but it would have to be sort of like a Mike Tyson, you have to take out your opponent very quickly sort of thing. I feel that if it's a short battle, I'd say that Cosby's in the higher standing, but if it's a long-range battle, I would say that Immaculate probably has a higher chance of winning. Now, on to Oz for Fight 3.
Why, thank you for that, Fate. Now on to our next fight. We have Zimmerman Golddust, Team Mozart, versus Xavier Z Ginger from Team Galaxy. And they are fighting on the Desert Ocean biome. Now, starting off with Zimmerman Golddust, his semblance, I think out of all his teammates, especially on a one-on-one, his semblance called Phratic Frenzy, which means that he is able to manipulate his aura and have it affect others' emotions with it making them go frenzy and crazy. Now, the downside of this is it only works if the other person has an aura. A person without an aura has a different side effect. It causes them to hallucinate a tragic path that is replayed over and over, making the person go crazy. Now, this aura does make a transparent glyph only to his eyesight that he is allowed to see to guide his base attacks, which I think is probably really, really scary, because you're on the battlefield and you take one look at him and it's just, you're gone. But there is his drawbacks on there, seeing how it does take a lot of his aura, especially if he doesn't have his weapon, which is what we're heading into next. The Zimmerman's Golddust weapon is called Philanostru, which is a shepherd's pipe with small vials attached to the back, which can be filled up with dust. How this works is each vial is connected to a button on the back of the end of the pipe that allows for a combination of tunes to make with combinations of dust, which means he can play certain frequency of tunes and they have an effect on the dust inside the pipe, which then allows him to make elemental attacks. Now, it was also told on a side note that there is another ability, which is the vials can be pushed inwards into the flute and out comes a staff, which he can use for close combat, which is really good for if someone gets in close to him. His weapon is mostly a ranged weapon, which is why it's a shepherd's pipe, but if he has to, he does have that ability to make it into a close range. Now, on to Xavier. His semblance is called Zip. He can make portals. He can make one to enter and one to exit. This makes him very versatile on the field, especially because Zimmerman's semblance, if Xavier makes a portal before Zimmerman activates his semblance, he can particularly dodge the semblance, which is a positive for Xavier, but he also has to be careful because he is only allowed to make up to 6 portals per fight he is in based on his aura level. But now we do go to Xavier and his weapon, which is based on his Faunus trait. Xavier is a lamb Faunus, which gives him, his fluffiness if you see it on the field, but it also gives him Faunus trait abilities. So his weapon is called Ares Wrath, which is also a whip that can be infused with dust depending on, the cartridges in the ram's eye, but it can also be straightened into a staff for close combat. So we can basically have a staff on staff or a whip on flute fight whenever these two get in close range, which I think would be really, really interesting. But now, on to our next fight. Fate, would you like to take it? This one seems really interesting.
And I will take it from here. Thank you, Oz. The next battle is going to be quite the doozy. This is between Cloveboyle of Team Pelican and Melanie Reinhard from Team Andromeda. This is going to be taking place on the full Savannah biome. Let's start with our first combatant, Cloveboyle. Cloveboyle is a thinker in fights, most likely. They're very cautious, want to de-escalate fights, possibly being a more peaceful character, and from what I can assume, would be one who tries finding ways to read your opponents before trying to take advantage of openings that you see, trying not to be underhanded. Clove's weapon is a really interesting one. The weapon is called Shellcracker. It's a really interesting weapon. It is a plasma rifle with a sword at the bottom, and it has a grappling hook. A grappling hook I don't really think would be all too effective in a savanna biome, since there's limited amounts of trees and areas that you can get away from, but it could be used in a pinch, which is always a good thing. Now, on to the semblance. Clove's semblance is Burrow, and it has the ability to, when Clove is making contact with the earth, by directly touching it and using the semblance on it, can create small fortifications, almost like little huts, that protect her from harm, but it cannot really be moved more than that. It's mostly a one and done situation. This can both be good and bad depending on where it is being used, especially since it can make you a sitting duck in the wrong situation. Now we're going to be going on to Melanie Reinhard. Melanie is also an interesting character. I'm going to be reading off Melanie's semblance first, because this is a little more difficult to explain. Melanie has a shade, a shadow that can split off from her, and it has the ability to move on its own, basically on a 2D plane. Any flat surface or areas that shadows can be created in light, it can exist in, which means it can go along walls, along the floor, and it can even hide in other shadows, such as the shadows left by a tree's canopy, or even other people's shadows. And how this is really powerful as well is that when it's coming into contact with other shadows of anything, inanimate object or human, it has to be small enough that it works, is it can interact with them, almost like a voodoo doll. And as a way to explain that, if it tries punching another person's shadow, it actually hits the person. It can potentially cause damage, or it can still deflect it, but it's basically another person there. The weakness that the shade possesses, however, is if there's a way to divert its form on the ground, like splitting the shadow apart, or using something like fire or something that lights up a short space, the shadow will dissipate and return to Melanie, and it will take more aura to summon it again. The semblance is going to be kind of good in the situation, because not only is it a 2v1, but with Clove's semblance of making burrows, especially if they have a hole in them, which means that the entire place would be filled with shadow, it could potentially be a defense from the shadow coming to you, but then it can enter and you would possibly be in trouble. Now on to Melanie's weapon, Singularity. It is a two-handed bident, which is a two-bladed spear, basically, or a trident without the middle blade. It is used to hook onto things. For example, you can stab something with it, and you can trap it in between the bident's blades. But it isn't just the missing part of the bident that's interesting. In its staff, there's a hole between the two blades that contains a sawed-off shotgun. And the thing that's the most horrifying about this is that if you are using it to hook onto something, like say if you hook it around a tree and pull the trigger, it can blow straight through something that is unable to defend itself. However, this can also shrink down into a more sawed-off shotgun form, and the two bident blades will act as bayonets on top of the shotgun. So it's decent, but not very good in that form for close range. And I think that it is about time that with this, I give my final opinions, and I'll pass it on to Oz. This battle I think could go either way. However, I'd say it depends on the situation. If Clove doesn't figure out how the shade works really quickly, it could make it so that catching up in this sort of fight would be impossible. But if they figure out how it works, it could make it difficult. I just don't see how the shade could be defeated by Clove's abilities. Now, I think I'm going to pass it on to Oz for fight number 4. Take it away.
Thanks for that awesome breakdown, Fates. Now, on to the next fight, which takes place in a full gravity anti-gravity biome. We have Quintessa Heartburn from the Heartburn family versus Albert Galaxy from the Galaxy family. Now, this is a fight between two royal families. So, starting off, I'm going to be going off Quintessa first. Quintessa is very formidable and very weak and strong in this type of field. Her weapon is a glass dust vial machine gun. She can load dust cartridges of glass in her gun, and her gun is quite formidable because it's huge. But also, being from Atlas, this gun can take those glass vials and make its own bullets, which is very, very cool. But that means that she is very limited on how many vials she can carry on her. Now, her semblance, which is very terrifying if you ask me, is called vaporization, which basically means that without her wearing her gloves specially made to protect her from touching things, if she touches anything, it vaporizes. But if she touches a grounded object, not only does that object vaporize, but anything that was connecting to it also vaporize. So she does wear special gloves to help her control this ability. And her weapon was especially made in the handles to have the same type of cloth, so then her weapon doesn't explode when she touches it due to her semblance. Now, this could be very helpful and very dangerous because on a gravity field, you have gravity polarities from every direction, which means that if she goes in a wrong direction, her gun can either drag her down or up, which causes her to misfire, or she touches one of the walls accidentally and destroys it. Now, going over to Albert, which we saw from, if you saw the versus the Galaxy and Dawn match, Albert's semblance is called the laws of chance, meaning that he can use his aura to make chances of actions and opinions have more of a misfortune or fortune effect for him. And he does have his weapon, which works hand in hand with his semblance, which is called Gamble. Gamble is a pair of dice nunchucks that can become a flare for melee combat, but they can also be detached as dust grenades, which with each button on them, Albert can click a certain number of combinations, and inside each dice, it's known to be a very high Atlas alchemaic equation that with each button that Albert clicks, you can combine different dust types to have different effects on the field. Now, this could play a big part into the field, but also negative because, again, you have those gravity polarity. That means if he throws it on the ground, but the polarities change, his weapons could go at the opposite direction, either harming him or harming another thing. So by the end of this fight, basically all the platforms in the air would be destroyed. Just let's take that into a moment of fact. But then also with that, Albert can use his chance to kind of, jam Quintessa's gun if he wants to or he puts enough effort into it. Now, his chance relies heavily on his aura, unlike Quintessa, which can give her the advantage because if Albert runs out of aura, she still has her aura advantage unless, she accidentally touches things around her because the bigger the object that she touches, the more aura it takes for it to disintegrate. So this could be an aura match fight if they don't go into melee. Now, if they go into melee, I would say Quintessa has more of the cause because she has a machine gun that can make its own bullets versus Albert with his dice. So this fight could be going back and forth before one person runs out of aura. So after that, we can head on to our next fight. Fate, take it away from there.
Thank you, Oz. I'm going to be doing the next fight now. The current fight is between Apex Nightstorm of Team Shockwave and Argent Lycan from Team Voltage. This is going to be taking place in the urban and ocean biomes. Apex has a semblance that has the ability to absorb energy, sort of similar to Yang and Atom, but it has to be energy that touches their arms, and they can change it into different types of energy. From what I assume that means is that dust can be turned into a different type of dust or something. However, the more energy that Apex absorbs, the harder it is for him to control all of the energy. Apex's weapon, Lightning Heart, is a 7-foot battle axe that can transform into an FN F2000. And he has a hidden wrist blade in his right gauntlet, which sort of reminds me of Assassin's Creed, and a foldable shield in his left gauntlet. Now, I'll go on to Argent Lycan. Argent's semblance is called Smokescreen, which means that he can turn any part of his body into a cloud of smoke, sort of similar to Ruby's ability to turn into rose petals. While in full smoke state, he cannot be attacked or attack others. He can only stay in this form for about 2 minutes continuously until his aura breaks. He can be affected by wind and is able to control his smoke as long as he is not being blown around, which makes sense since smoke that's being blown dissipates, so you'd kind of be forced out of that form. He can go through the ground and appear elsewhere, but I'd assume that takes aura to basically phase through objects. I'd say it depends on how thick the thing in question is. The weapons are called Alpha and Omega, a set of Dao swords. One's black and I assume the other one is white, and they have an interesting ability that they can attach to each other and become both one huge greatsword, I'd assume it's greatsword, or they can split into different swords that are the same design so that they can be dual wielded. The blades have the ability to hold dust, but mainly use fire and ice. In this fight, I believe that Apex actually has the high ground, but that is because Apex has a few things up his sleeve that could be used against Argent. If the swords channel different dust types and come into contact with Apex, he can change them into something else and use it against him. And not to mention that Apex has a shield, so he can use it to block blades and possibly attack with his battle axe immediately after taking advantage of his opponent's moves. Well, that's my 2 cents. I'm going to pass it to Oz again for his next battle. Here you go, Oz.
Thanks for that, Fates. Our next match is Pete Bog from Team Pelican versus Bronze Charcoal from Team Midnight Black, fighting in the Savannah and Forest biome. First, we have Pete Bog. Pete Bog is based off of the Frog Prince. He is based off of the not ugly, but handily and partly agile. He mostly wears a lot of green, which I can see can play out if he hides around in the forest biome. Now, going on to his semblance is explosive muscles, kind of those of like Deku from My Hero Academia. He can charge his aura and intense his muscle to create kind of a mid-fight Yang, meaning he can launch himself in any direction he points with his arms and force to eject himself. Especially in water, it looks like he moves the fastest. So on this field, it looks like he has disadvantage because there is no water. And also, he can't change directions, thus using his weapons, which we will get onto next, which is a blunderbuss Padaio, which has wind dust shots and a fire dust shot for traveling and for being used as an offensive respectively. So even if he uses his semblance to move fast enough, if he needs to change direction, he kind of can be like Ironwood when Ironwood uses his gravity gun to kind of shoot in different directions. He can use his weapon to do the same thing. That or, unless he burns the field. Up next, after that, we have Bronze Charcoal, who is from Vacchio. Her semblance is Seismic Sense. Bronze is a blind character, which means she cannot see, which means that her semblance comes from her touch. And if you get a wrong interpretation, I will hunt you down, and I will hunt you down again. But anyways, so she uses her semblance for her sight. And her sight is a 10-meter circle, but after training when she was younger, she can make her circle of her sensing through the ground 30 meters. That's just a general location of objects and people's feet. Basically, you kind of have Toph from Avatar, The Last Airbender, kind of ability. So, it's more of the sensing because she's blind. But now, her weapons, which is called Earth's Nightmare, are dual tonfa shotguns. These are two tonfas that have triggers on both of the handles that can be used for firing or for blocking and attacking, which goes into her fighting style. Bronze is almost completely a melee combat fighter, meaning she can fire off her shotguns at a close range. However, her accuracy is iffy as she is blind, and her semblance allows for some compensation for this. However, others can more than easily dodge unless her weapon is literally in their gut from being swung beforehand. So this could give her disadvantage and advantage depending on how sparsely she can use her semblance. Her semblance will be a really big play in this fight. Now, the dust that she uses mostly in her weapons and with her semblance are earth and water. Water to solidify any solid ground, and earth for general purposes, and also it looks like fire dust shotgun rounds. So she has a versatile between earth, water, and fire to use in her weapons, which I think is really cool. But I would probably have to say that in this fight, she could have the upper hand using her semblance, but with it being a savanna and forest biome, I could see that using the forest to kind of knock her off guard with her semblance, this fight can go any direction. And time for this last fight, Fate, why don't you take it away?
Okay, here we are for the final match of the revised first group of the singles bracket. This is going to be against Rouge Fitzrovia of Team Chernobog and Iroboido of Team IC. This is going to be taking place in the anti-gravity and forest biome. Let's first take a look at Rouge to see how Rouge will work in this battle. Rouge's weapon, Black Lament, is a little complicated, but I think I can explain it pretty well. It has a three-way hybrid form, and the three different forms each have different properties. There is a sword form that is used the least out of close combat, and then there is a sniper rifle form and a machine gun form. And that might seem to be a little counterintuitive, but this has a very interesting property, which is you have to load the different ammo types when it's changing its forms, just to make it work as all of the weapons and not just using the same magazine for everything. As a result, Rouge carries two different types of dust magazines, which usually have fire, ice, and gravity dust. If I had a guess, I'd say that gravity is to help the issue machine guns have of less to no stability. And another interesting thing about this is this also hints into Rouge's fighting style, which is trying to stay long range, only really going close range. There's no other option. Otherwise, Rouge likes to change between the sniper rifle, machine gun form, to spice things up and make it so her opponent can't predict what she's going to do. Now, onto Rouge's semblance. This is a very interesting one. It's called Usurper. Usurper works sort of like a mind control style effect, and how it works is Rouge can extend her aura a little bit, most likely, to take control of weaker beings such as grim robots and some summons that are not either directly made out of aura or have a connection to a user. So, as an example, it can't take control of a Shni summon, as far as I'm aware, because those are directly connected to the user's aura, as seen with how the Shni summons seem to know exactly what's going on, even if they can't see if their user is in danger or not. And I'd assume also that, yeah, it takes more aura to control beings of different sizes. The bigger it is, the more aura it takes to control it, and I'd assume that it also chips away at aura over time the longer it's being controlled. So it can so it sort of works as a double-edged sword. I would definitely say, though, that this semblance, while very unique, does have the effect of possibly being a glass cannon, since if you're over-trusting in something that you've taken control of with a semblance, and then you lose control of it, maybe if your aura breaks or something, you're at the thing you were controlling's mercy. That makes it a very big threat. Now, let's get on to Iro. Iro has an interesting weapon, dual fans with retractable blades called Harmony and Balance. She can use them in a similar method to how Maria's scythes work, putting them together and using them to dual wield, or even call them to her, sort of like a boomerang with how you saw Maria using her scythes in Volume 6. She uses them to manipulate loose gravity dust crystals that she carries with her to create a wide range of projectile-based attacks. This is a very interesting concept, and I really would like to see how this could possibly work in a fight with someone who has a mastery of gravity dust of their own. Iro's semblance doesn't really work in a combat setting. It's called, well, specifically a singles one, it's called spiritual projection or project. It cannot be turned off. It works sort of similarly to how Raven's works, by having sort of bonds with specific people, and you're able to have something happen as a result of those bonds. This one is that you're able to tell the well-being of people you're bonded with, especially if they're in grave danger, which is definitely useful when you're fighting alongside your team and you're fighting something like a Horde of Grim, but on your own in a fight, I don't really think that this semblance works very well on its own. In this fight, I believe that this one might actually be a 50-50, primarily taking place in part of an anti-gravity biome and a forest biome, which one of these complements both people. Each person gets a biome that suits them. I'd assume that Rouge would do very good in the forest setting because she'd have cover from the trees with a sniper rifle, and I assume that Iro would have a benefit from the anti-gravity biome since she has a thing of already controlling gravity. So I'd say that this depends wholly on what someone is thinking would win in this fight overall. Now I'm gonna pass this over to Oz for the finishing notes. Have a good day, everyone.
Why, thank you, Fate, for that. So that is the first groups of singles. If you like this video, please subscribe, hit that like button, slash that bell icon, and make sure you go and vote for your favorite matches down below. Link is in the description down below, plus the Google spreadsheet to see who's also in the other 7 groups. This is Group A. There are 7 more groups. We also now have our Patreon set up. Patreon link will be in the description down below. Support us. It does really a lot for you guys too, because when you support us, we can make your guys' characters and content more come to life, real expectations. So that link is in the description down below. Thanks again to Phoenix Knight for letting me do this. His channel link is down in the description below. And we will see you all in the next announcement fight. Bye bye.
Push me, and then just touch me, till I can get my satisfaction.
Push me, and then just hurt me, till I can get my